Welcome to Where'd That Happen with Frank Patterson, where I will share some of my favorite stories from my many travels and experiences. On today's episode, I'll be talking about the last time I had to renew my passport. It was May of 2014, and a hard-hitting rock band duo called Royal Blood had released a track called Figure It Out. Now, this one is an amazing track. The most amazing part that I've always loved about Royal Blood is the two-piece band, and they don't even have a lead guitar. The lead guitar is actually a bass guitar. So with just a bass guitar, a set of drums, and the killer vocals by their bassist, Royal Blood has been able to produce an amazing list of fantastic, hard-hitting songs that I have appreciated every last one of their songs out of all of their album releases. I've had the opportunity to see Royal Blood in concert, and it is an amazing experience to be able to see those two guys produce so much quality sound out of those two instruments and make some of the best hard-hitting rock songs that have been released in the last 20 years. Now, in May 2014, I was on a trip for work over to the Philippines, and on my way over there, I had a layover in Tokyo, Japan. Now, I had never been to Tokyo, and during this particular trip, for reasons I'll explain, I ended up with a layover, and I ended up having to leave the airport and spend some time, 3 days total, in downtown Tokyo. Well, really, 2 nights, and one of them doesn't really count as a day. So, nevertheless, downtown Tokyo and get to my hotel room. Very small hotel room, but everything that you need. It had a bed, it had a washroom. It was all good. It was within walking distance of this great little open market area. So the first night I got there, I checked in my hotel, I dropped my bags, and went out for a stroll across the street, and it was just really amazing. There were just a string of little kiosk-style restaurants. I had no idea what I was ordering. You could stop and grab a beverage or grab a snack, and none of which, of course, is in English. Nevertheless, for about the next 2 hours, just taking in the sights and experiences before I would go back and get some well-deserved rest after my flight over from Toronto. The next day, I had pretty much the day to myself, and had the opportunity to go and see some of the sites that Tokyo has to offer. I got to go to their electronics district. I got to ride the Tokyo subway system. You know, just hitting the subway in Tokyo is an amazing experience. I still remember going to the subway station and looking at this giant, crazy map of like 25 crazy interconnected lines, different colors all over, and trying to figure out where I was going. I knew where I wanted to go. I wanted to go visit in Tokyo. They have an electronics district, but so I knew the name of the neighborhood that I needed to get to. Amazingly enough, the self-serve machine did have English-based instructions. I was able to put in my credit card, get a ticket, and follow the signs to find my way where I needed to go. traversing the Japanese subway. Now, I guess wherever it was that I was going and the time of the day that I happened to be traveling at, I guess I had missed rush hour, so I didn't get to have that experience that we've seen on those videos of people getting crammed into the subway cars, getting on a busy subway car in downtown Tokyo. But it worked. I got where I needed to go. The electronics district, it's hard to describe. It is like 6 city blocks of pretty much nothing but electronics stores. All forms of different electronic stores. One store, 7 floors of nothing but electronics, various forms of household electronics, everything from video games to automated butt washing bidet style toilet seats. I I spent 3 hours just walking this neighborhood of nonstop department stores, hopefully trying to find some sort of trinket or souvenir that I could take home to my kids. Uh, the plan later that night, of course, was, well, I was in Tokyo. So what was I going to do? I was going to get sushi and then hopefully get a chance to see some of the nightlife in Tokyo. And that's exactly what I did. Again, I fortunately have a buddy of mine, Rod, who had spent quite a bit of time in Tokyo. So I had been texting him knowing that I was going to spend a couple of days in Tokyo. And he gave me some recommendations about some of the neighborhoods to go try and visit and the best places to try to find a good sushi restaurant and maybe a little bit of nightlife. So I, of course, used my friend Google, and I found myself a sushi restaurant. I sat down. I think I had to go down a couple of stairs. It was kind of like one of those not quite full basement level, but 3 or 4 steps down from the sidewalk. And I go into this small, little unassuming restaurant. I think there was maybe 4 or 5 tables in the restaurant, but I went and grabbed myself a seat right up at the sushi bar. And I, the sushi chef behind the sushi bar handed me a menu. I pointed to a few things, and he got to work, started making my sushi. Now, I love sushi. I've eaten at sushi restaurants in Toronto, New York, and just about pretty much anywhere else I've ever traveled. But I got to tell you, the sushi that you get in Tokyo is like a different kind of food. That, I guess, is what we'll call sushi. Everything else that we eat that's not in Tokyo is something similar to sushi, but it's not quite the same. The craziness of the flavor, the thing that I actually found most different was the rice was actually warm. That wasn't something that I'd ever had with sushi I've ordered in a restaurant in North America before, but it was served warm. There was a good amount of wasabi already in the sushi. You didn't need to put that extra wasabi that they usually put on the side. That wasabi was solid, built into the sushi, and it was just an amazing flavor, like nothing else I had ever had before. One of the best meals I'd ever had in my life. Now, of course, I was traveling by myself this time, so it really I could concentrate on the food. It wasn't just part of no dinner conversation involved here. I just sat and I truly enjoyed my sushi. After going out for sushi, I saw there was a small bar actually across the street from the sushi restaurant. Honestly, to this day, I can't remember the name of that particular bar, but I went in, and when I got inside, I noticed it was a good mix of people. It wasn't just locals. There was a good mix of expats or foreigners in the bar, as well as some local Japanese, and I was able to, start striking up some conversations with some of the folks that were in the bar. And what I noticed, though, is it was a pretty good crowd, and I think this was like a Tuesday night. And I was like, well, why is everybody here in this little bar? And one of the one of the guys I was talking to said, well, they're actually having it's a bit of a launch party. They're installing the very first Bitcoin ATM machine anywhere here in this bar. I'm like, a Bitcoin ATM. Now, Bitcoin was new. This was 2014. I had heard of Bitcoin probably a year or two prior to that, and really didn't quite understand the concept of cryptocurrency or what really Bitcoin was, and definitely no concept of what it would become. I think at the time, a single Bitcoin was probably worth, I think it was 120 US at the time. Nevertheless, Bitcoin ATM, you could put in US dollar cash, and in return, it would give you a receipt with an encrypted code. That code could then be used to add funds to your digital wallet so that you could essentially buy Bitcoin directly in cash from an ATM. I thought, wow, this is a crazy novelty, but this is the very first Bitcoin ATM anywhere in the world, so of course I had to try it. So I had a $10 American bill, I think, with me, so I stuck my $10 in the machine, and it spit out my receipt, and there I was, the proud owner of essentially 1/10 of a Bitcoin. I put that receipt in my pocket and kind of forgot about it and went about the rest of my evening. Interesting little side note, of course, is that I, to this day, have no idea where that receipt is. I think, given Bitcoin's current valuation of 60, or actually in Canadian dollars, $75,000 per Bitcoin compared to the $120 at the time I bought that back in 2014. I'm pretty sure it's worth more than the $10 I invested, but given the fact that I have no clue where that receipt is, it's not worth anything. We'll continue on. The rest of the evening, really enjoyed my time with my newfound friends from various places from around the globe. Went back, and the next day I flew out of Tokyo on my way to the Philippines and flew into Manila. Now, this kind of gets me to the point of what was I doing in Tokyo for 3 days when I was on a business trip where I was going to the Philippines. By the way, this was not a planned layover. My original flight plan was that I was going to be connecting in Tokyo on my way to Manila with about I think it was a 2.5, 3 hour layover. Anyways, when I arrived in Tokyo, fortunately I was flying business class at the times, and one of those perks of flying business class is that you get to hang out in the business class lounge in between your flights. So I get off my flight from Toronto on the way to Tokyo. I'm in the Tokyo airport and go through the connections desk, and I go to the lounge and I check in at the lounge, go and grab a snack, and I'm sitting down in the lounge, and over the loudspeaker in the lounge, they called my name, and they said, "Can Brent Pattison come to the front desk? Mr. Pattison, please come to the front desk." I'm like, what did I do? Anyway, so I go to the front desk, and I say to the girl, I'm Brent. How can I help? And she says, "Well, Mr. Pattison, can we see your passport?" I'm like, "My passport? Why do you need to see my passport?" She goes, "Well, we just need to check some information." So I'm like, "Okay, all right." So I go back to where I was sitting. I grab my passport from my bag, and I hand it to the girl. And she goes, okay. She looks at the passport, and she goes, "I'm really sorry, Mr. Pattison, but you're not going to be able to get on your flight to Manila." I'm like, "Why?" She goes, "Well, unfortunately, your passport expires in November of this year." I'm like, "Yeah, it's May. It doesn't expire for like another 5 months." She goes, "Well, that's the problem. Unfortunately, the Philippines has a requirement that your passport has to have 6 months of validity before it expires. when you arrive. I'm like, oh, okay. So what does that mean? She goes, well, you're not going to be able to get on your flight to Manila. And I'm like, okay, so what do we do from here? Do I have to go home? Do I have to go back to Toronto? What do we do? And she's like, well, I'm going to talk to my supervisor and we're going to figure out what options we have. So she goes away for a few minutes. I'm kind of sitting there like, all right, well, whatever. It is what, this is one of those, it is what it is. It is what it is kind of situations. So I sit there for a little bit and she comes back and she says, well, Mr. Pattison, there is a potential solution. We don't, here in Japan, have that same requirement. One of your options, instead of flying home, is you could leave the airport, go to the Canadian Embassy, and they can renew your passport while you're here. And then once you get your passport renewed, we'll make arrangements and we'll get you on the next flight to Manila. I'm like, all right, okay. Now, she was really, super nice about it, and the airline, they made arrangements for the hotel. They were going to cover the cost of the hotel. They made arrangements for my bus transportation to get me from the airport to the hotel downtown Tokyo. Made arrangements for to call them once I had my passport renewed so that they could rebook me on the next flight to Manila. All was okay. And that's exactly what I was able to do. In between going, just before the first thing I did when I woke up that next morning, of course, was not immediately jump on the subway and go shopping for electronics. I went to the Canadian Embassy and they gave me the information that I needed to complete my passport renewal. Now, of course, one of the tricky things is when renewing an expired passport, well, in this case, a soon-to-be expired passport, you do need some personal references who can truly validate that you are who you say you are. Now, there is a big time zone difference. So I went to the Canadian Embassy in the morning. I think I got in and got everything sorted out around 10, 11 a.m., and I needed to get some references. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm calling anybody who will answer the phone back home to let them know I need someone who can be ready to answer the phone when the embassy calls to validate that I am who I say I am so I can get the passport renewal. While I'm doing that, I go to the closest photo shop that I can find because I need to get a new passport photo taken. So I go get a new passport photo taken. I was able to reach a couple of my buddies who still answered the phone, I think probably at 11 o'clock that night, and agreed to stay awake until the embassy called them. I got my paperwork right back to the embassy, and they said, well, we'll call your references, and then hopefully we'll have everything ready for you for pickup tomorrow morning. I'm like, perfect. Fortunately, it all worked out. I was able to enjoy the rest of my day in Tokyo and go get my passport the next day. And that's where I renewed my last passport in the city with amazing lights in the downtown area, ridiculous, crazy, but very efficient subway system, and more electronic stores than probably every other country put together and combined.